Hey, TechKnowStuds! If I was attacking an organization, after analyzing what my attack vectors are, my next step would be to look for vulnerabilities. So in this video, let's talk about what vulnerabilities are and where we might find those vulnerabilities. In this video, we're going to start out with just a brief mention around what vulnerabilities are. I'm going to give you a few examples, and then we'll get into some common vulnerabilities to watch out for. And at this point, when we're looking at the vulnerabilities, we've already taken a look at our attack surface. Where can we enter into the organization at? If the organization was a building and we're trying to gain access to the building, it would be all of this surface area here of how we can get into the building. The vectors would be the individual entry points into the building. Vulnerability would be the weaknesses of those individual attack vectors. As an example, if I were trying to go through the front door, what is the weaknesses? What is the vulnerabilities that I could leverage to make it through the front door? So here are some examples of vulnerabilities. Maybe the lock on the front door is faulty, and so I'm easily able to pick it or break it, or perhaps it doesn't even function at all. Or maybe there's a camera on the front door, but it's pointed in the wrong direction, so it's completely useless. Or perhaps there's a guard that normally I wouldn't say this is a good entry point to break into. However, I know that they take a break for half an hour at midnight every single day. And since I know that routine, I'm able to leverage that to be able to get through the door during that time. If I wanted to label these, I could label that faulty lock as a technology weakness. Or perhaps the camera being pointed in the wrong direction, I could label that as being a misconfiguration, that someone misconfigured it. As far as the guard taking a break at the same time every day, then I could label that as a process problem. We commonly see vulnerabilities within software. So much so, I'm going to get into another video specifically on software vulnerabilities. But here's just a brief rundown of software vulnerabilities. Another common source for vulnerabilities is hardware vulnerabilities. We see that with things like firmware and not updating firmware on these different appliances. Of course, firmware also gets a little bit back to that software side of things. But what happens is that this hardware can also become out of date. It becomes end of life and becomes legacy equipment, outdated equipment that's no longer getting updates. So if they were to find a security issue on end of life appliances, then it doesn't get updated, and so therefore there's that security vulnerability that just lasts on that equipment. There are also common vulnerabilities associated with virtualization. Virtualization is when you have many virtual machines that are virtually running on top of one physical machine. And we have in between what's called a hypervisor that's controlling all of that. Well, one of these issues, one of these common vulnerabilities is virtual machine escape. And that's when a machine, one of these virtual machines, gains more access than they should to controlling the actual machine. And we also have some problems when it comes to resource reuse. That is that there's some allocation that happens. Let's say one machine gets allocated some disk space or memory usage, and then that gets reallocated later on because these are all shared resources, so it gets reallocated to another device. Well, this other device may then have access to some of the prior information that this other machine was storing there. We also have some protocol vulnerabilities. When we first started creating things like HTTP, it was not secure. So then what we did is we created HTTPS, a secure version of that. We used SSL at the time, now it's called TLS, Transport Layer Security. So we used Transport Layer Security to make HTTP more secure. But we found vulnerabilities in that as well. And so we had to go through versions, different versions, and now we're on TLS 1.3, and that is a more secure version than TLS 1.2. It has less vulnerabilities to it. We also implement cryptography to be able to secure our data, to encrypt our data, to make sure that their data is secure. However, if we're choosing the wrong ciphers or we've implemented it wrong, then it has vulnerabilities as well. So we can have cryptographic vulnerabilities. One of the most common ones that I've found is just misconfiguring devices. I've had employees that don't necessarily know what they're doing, or they haven't been paying attention, or they haven't followed their processes, and so therefore they make misconfigurations on the equipment, opening up vulnerabilities on the equipment. When there is misconfiguration, a lot of times we like to point at the user and say they misconfigured it. However, a lot of times it's a process problem. We need to take a look at the process and find out why the process failed and why there's a vulnerability in the process. There's also vulnerabilities associated with mobile devices. So as an example of this is somebody might jailbreak their phone. They may find that their phone is very restrictive on what they can install and what they can configure. And so what they'll do is they'll bypass the regular restrictions and they'll using a jailbreaking method and then be able to have more control over their phone. And then they do things like side loading, where they install third-party software that's not supposed to go on the phone, that's not approved for the phone, but they install that software. It gives them extra functionality, but the problem is it opens up a lot of vulnerabilities for that unapproved software. We also utilize several supply chains. That's other vendors, suppliers, cloud providers, managed service providers. They supply us with different services and technologies. Well, each one of those is an attack vector, and therefore it has its own set of vulnerabilities to it. So as you can see, that each attack vector into our organization can have its own set of vulnerabilities. We talked about some of the common vulnerabilities throughout this video, but there are a lot more that are out there. So we just have to be mindful of those different attack vectors and what vulnerabilities each of those attack vectors have.